This phase is sacred. It's a chrysalis, not a collapse. If you can stay here long enough, resisting the urge to rush or retreat, you'll begin to feel it, the quiet pulse of something deeper rising. The self isn't loud, but it's constant, waiting for you to trust what cannot yet be named. Jung had a term for this sacred reversal of energy, enantiodromia, the phenomenon where something, when taken to its extreme, transforms into its opposite. Nowhere is this more evident than in the aftermath of awakening. You move from the frantic striving of the ego, I must do everything, to the hollow stillness of the soul. Why do anything at all? The pendulum swings, not because you're broken, but because balance demands it. The psyche, long trapped in performance, finally collapses into rest. This descent isn't a pathology, it's an initiation. In the language of myth, this is the archetype of the hermit, the withdrawal from the world before rebirth. It's the sacred cocoon where the caterpillar dissolves into formlessness, no longer a crawling self, not yet a flying one. It's the goo phase, unstructured, undefined, unproductive by modern standards, but necessary. The psyche is undergoing an alchemical transformation, and transformation, Jung would say, begins in darkness, not in bypassing, not in good vibes only, but in descent. This is where modern spirituality often loses its depth, glamorizing awakening while ignoring its crucifixion. Jung insisted that the shadow, the rejected, uncomfortable, unconscious parts of ourselves, isn't something to escape, but to integrate. Shadow work isn't advanced-level spirituality. It's the foundation of becoming whole. In this state of nothingness you now occupy, the unconscious is rising, not as a villain, but as a messenger. What you once repressed, your grief, your rage, your unmet needs, begins to surface because now, at last, there's space. The ego panics. It wants action, clarity, a label. But the self, quietly and persistently, whispers, let go. I am forming something deeper. This is where the real work begins, not in achievement, but in surrender, not in clarity, but in witnessing. The psyche isn't malfunctioning. It's metabolizing years of noise, illusion, and false striving. It halts your drive, your ambition, your hunger, so you have no choice but to sit with what you've buried. In that stillness, in that haunting void, you begin to remember. Then, almost imperceptibly, something stirs. A new form of motivation arises, but it's nothing like the old. It isn't born of anxiety, isn't urgent or performative. It doesn't roar, it hums. A soul-led impulse to move, not because you must, but because it would be a betrayal of truth not to. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not as an abstract ideal, but as a living, breathing compass within. It doesn't chase, it calls, and what it calls you toward isn't success, but wholeness. So, you've crossed the threshold and stood in the silence. You've tasted stillness, not as stagnation, but as a sacred pause. You've wandered through the inner night, where no voice called out, and no light showed the way. And now, something ancient begins to stir, not as a roar, not as lightning, but as a quiet inner pull, a soft pulse that doesn't urge you to return to what was, but invites you to create what has never been. This is the first whisper of the self, not in words, but in feeling, in pull, in presence. Jung called this the symbolic life, a life no longer ruled by ego or convention, but guided by the deeper forces of the soul. Once the ego surrenders and the unconscious is honored, life ceases to be a game of survival and becomes an unfolding of meaning. Here's the paradox. It may look beautifully ordinary. When the self begins to lead, you no longer hustle, you respond. You're not driven by the fear of missing out, but by the quiet conviction of inner alignment. You stop chasing clarity as a prize and begin recognizing it when it arrives, often dressed in simplicity. Living from the self doesn't mean you'll always be energized or certain. Fatigue, doubt, and grief still pass through. That's the texture of human life. But what disappears is the constant ache of self-betrayal, the dull exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that no longer fits. Instead, something shifts. You find yourself creating, even when no one applauds, saying no, even when yes is expected, following wonder rather than ticking boxes. You begin choosing peace over performance. This isn't inertia. It's a new fuel. Not adrenaline, but alignment. Not pressure, but presence. Jung called this living symbolically, not as an escape into fantasy, but as a return to soul. You begin to trust the language of dreams, gut instincts, symbols, and synchronicities. Your life becomes a dialogue, not a monologue shouted into the void, but a conversation with the unseen. What does that look like? Sometimes it's as subtle as asking different questions. Not, what should I do? But what is quietly calling me? Not, what's the plan? But where is life nudging me? Not, how can I prove myself? But what feels true? You stop trying to dominate life and start participating with it. Ambition doesn't vanish. It transforms into devotion. Devotion to what's real, what's true, what brings you alive. And strangely, that devotion moves mountains. It gets things done, but from wholeness, not depletion. Now it's sustainable. Now it's soul-powered. This is the self's motivation, not to impress, but to express. And it leads you, often without effort, to create, to teach, to heal, to serve. Not because you should, but because your whole being says yes. So, if you've been wondering where your spark went after awakening, remember, it's not gone. The old fire burned away so a deeper flame could emerge, one that won't flicker in the storms of the world. Jung never promised ease, but he did promise depth. If you're here, reading this, you're already walking the path. This isn't the end of your awakening. It's the beginning of your becoming. If something in this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to share your voice in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home? Or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become a lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they're unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach those who need to remember. Real love doesn't demand that we shrink. True connection doesn't ask for the sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we'll ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship mirrors our personal evolution. If there's a theme, question, or wound you'd like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice isn't just welcome here, it's essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember, when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. Until that moment, Let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That's the foundation, the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.